Hello, and welcome to today's story. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more. The story you're about to hear is based on accounts and rumors. Its full truth can't be confirmed. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive right in. I'd only been a bus driver for 5 days when they offered me the night shift. Not just any night shift. Clark, my supervisor, called it Route 13, and the way he said it made it sound like a challenge. I was fresh out of training, still getting used to the way the big wheel felt in my hands, but the pay was better than anything I'd had before. Extra pay for late hours and special conditions. More than double my normal rate. The catch? Clark slid me a thick brown envelope and said, "Read everything before you start. Follow it to the letter." Inside the depot's break room, under the stale hum of the vending machine, I tore it open. No map, no schedule, just a single sheet of paper with Route 13, final trip, typed across the top, and a list of rules underneath. Rules: do not pick up passengers between stops. If someone boards wearing a mask or full face covering, do not speak until they exit. Always leave the very last seat empty. If a passenger asks the time, tell them it is exactly midnight, no matter what. Do not finish the route with more passengers than you started with. If you pass stop 4 twice, you have missed your exit. Do not attempt a third pass. Should a passenger hand you an envelope, place it unopened in the glove compartment. Never look inside. If the bus is empty before the final stop, do not stop driving until you reach the depot. No matter what happens, at the bottom, bold letters punched me in the eyes. Failure to follow the rules will void your exit. I'd worked construction before this. I'd been a warehouse picker. I'd done graveyard shifts at gas stations where the weirdest thing I saw was a drunk guy trying to buy bread with buttons. These rules, they read like someone was trying too hard to be spooky. Still, I folded the paper and slipped it in my jacket. Rules were rules, and double pay was double pay. It was just after 11:30 p.m. when I eased the bus out of the depot. Wipers thumping against a drizzle that painted everything slick. The streets looked abandoned except for the occasional cat darting under cars. The first stop was empty. Just an old shelter with peeling paint and the sound of rain ticking against the roof. At the second stop, 2 passengers climbed aboard without looking at me. A man in a navy trench coat with the collar pulled high, and a thin woman clutching a brown paper bag like it might fall apart in her hands. Neither said a word. 2 passengers to start. Easy to remember. Between the second and third stop, I spotted him, a man standing alone at the curb. Nowhere near a stop. His soaked red jacket glared under the streetlights. He raised an arm, palm out, like he already knew I'd stop. Rule 1, do not pick up passengers between stops. His mouth moved, maybe please, maybe help, but I pressed the accelerator. In the mirror, I saw him, still standing there, arm raised until the curve swallowed him. The woman with the paper bag was watching me in the reflection. Her lips didn't move, but I swear I saw her mouth 2 words. Good choice. The third stop was barely more than a cracked sidewalk and a leaning lamppost. A figure was waiting there, motionless in the drizzle. At first, I thought it was just a regular commuter, until the light hit the smooth black curve of a motorcycle helmet, full face covering. No decals, no scratches, just a perfect, glossy shell reflecting the street lamp. Rule 2. If someone boards wearing a mask or full face covering, do not speak until they exit. He stepped on without a word, coins clinking into the fare box. The sound echoed in the hollow quiet of the bus. His head turned just enough to make me feel he was looking directly at me through the visor. Then he walked halfway down the aisle and sat perfectly upright, hands on his knees, helmet fixed forward. I didn't say a thing. The man in the trench coat shifted in his seat, glancing toward the helmeted passenger. The woman with the paper bag didn't move, but her grip on it tightened. The brown paper crackled in the silence. We pulled away from the stop, and the rain turned heavier, a thick, steady sheet that blurred the edges of the world outside. Halfway to the fourth stop, the trenchcoat man stood and walked slowly up the aisle. He stopped at the yellow line by the driver's seat. "What time is it?" he asked. The overhead clock read 11:52 p.m. My mouth almost opened with the truth, but Rule 4 hit me hard. If a passenger asks the time, tell them it is exactly midnight. "It's exactly midnight," I said. He studied me for a moment, long enough that I could see water droplets clinging to the brim of his collar, then nodded once and returned to his seat. I caught a movement in the mirror. The helmeted passenger had turned his head slightly toward me, as if he'd been waiting for that answer. Stop 4 was ahead, a corner with a flickering streetlight and no shelter. I slowed to a stop, doors hissing open to nothing. No one got on, but the moment I shut the doors, I noticed the back row. The last seat, the one the rules said to keep empty, wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't occupied exactly, not by anyone I could clearly see. Instead, something dark and liquid seemed to pool in the seat, shifting like oil catching light, except there was no light for it to catch. The ceiling lamp above it flickered in slow, irregular bursts. Every time it went out, I thought I saw a vague shape in the shadow, like a person sitting perfectly still. I gripped the wheel harder and kept driving. I didn't look directly again. We were halfway to the fifth stop when the woman with the paper bag stood up and walked to the front. Without meeting my eyes, she placed a small white envelope on the dashboard and walked back to her seat. The envelope was thin, no writing on it, just sealed with a perfect fold. Rule 7. Should a passenger hand you an envelope, place it unopened in the glove compartment. Never look inside. I slid it into the glove box without hesitation, though my fingers itched to peek. I told myself the money was too good to screw this up. At the fifth stop, another passenger climbed aboard, middle-aged, bald, wearing a wet windbreaker zipped all the way up to his chin. He didn't pay fare, didn't even look at me. Just walked down the aisle and sat 3 seats behind the helmeted man. Something about him was wrong. His clothes dripped rainwater onto the floor, but his hairless head was completely dry. We pulled away and the bus felt heavier, not physically, but in atmosphere. Like the air was thicker, the space between the rows tighter. When I checked the mirror, the last seat was still holding that shifting dark stain. Only now it was larger. By the time we reached the 6th stop, I knew the pay wasn't worth it. The bald man in the windbreaker still hadn't spoken. The helmeted passenger hadn't moved an inch except for that one tilt of his head back at stop 3. The trenchcoat man sat rigid, staring straight ahead, and the woman with the paper bag kept her eyes down like she was afraid of what she might see if she looked up. And behind them all, the last seat, the one that was supposed to stay empty, was wrong. The shifting darkness that had been pooling there was now almost solid, as if the shadows had gathered enough weight to hold a shape. It looked like a figure sitting hunched forward, elbows on knees, head low, but the light above it was still flickering, so every few seconds it would vanish back into formless black. The road between stop 6 and the loop back toward stop 1 was a stretch of cracked asphalt I didn't recognize. I've lived in the city my whole life. I know the grid like the back of my hand, but these streets felt misplaced. No buildings I recognized, no storefronts, just tall, featureless walls and intersections that felt slightly too sharp, like someone had copied and pasted them from somewhere else. I checked the dashboard clock, 12:04 a.m., but I could have sworn only a minute had passed since stop 6. As we rolled on, the bald man stood and walked toward me. "What time is it?" he asked, voice flat, eyes unfocused, like he wasn't looking at me, just through me. Rule 4, if a passenger asks the time, tell them it is exactly midnight. It's exactly midnight, I said. He gave a single jerky nod and walked back to his seat. But here's the thing, he didn't sit down. He walked right past his row, down the aisle, and stopped in front of the last seat. Without hesitation, he sat in it. My grip on the wheel tightened. Rule 3, always leave the very last seat empty. I hadn't broken it, he had. I told myself that. But the bold letters at the bottom of the rule sheet didn't care who was at fault. Failure to follow the rules will void your exit. In the mirror, the darkness seemed to swallow him. It wasn't like he was sitting on the shadow. It was like the shadow was inside him now, pooling into his chest, crawling up into his head. The flickering light above stopped flickering. The bald man didn't move again. We passed stop 4, only we shouldn't have. Stop 4 was earlier in the route. We were nowhere near it, but there it was. Same flickering streetlight, same sagging shelter. Rule 6, if you pass stop 4 twice, you have missed your exit. Do not attempt a third pass. My stomach tightened. We hadn't looped yet. We were still on the outbound stretch. The woman with the paper bag suddenly stood. She walked up to me fast, voice low and urgent. You're going to see it again, she said. When you do, don't stop. No matter who's standing there, no matter what they say. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she turned and walked back to her seat without waiting for a reply. The street ahead bent hard left, and sure enough, stop 4 again. This time, someone was there. It was the man in the red jacket from earlier, the one I'd passed between stops. He was soaked through, water streaming from his sleeves, but now he was holding something in his hands. A bus timetable, dripping wet, pages clinging together. He stepped forward as I approached, arm outstretched like he was hailing me. His mouth moved in a silent plea. Every instinct screamed to stop. Not because I wanted to help him, but because the wrongness of him was magnetic. I gritted my teeth and drove past. The helmeted passenger turned his head sharply toward me, visor catching the overhead light in a quick glare. The trenchcoat man did the same, slow and deliberate. Even the woman with the paper bag peeked up, eyes dark. The message in their looks was clear. You made the right choice. We were approaching the second to last stop when the bus lights flickered, just once, but enough to make my reflection in the windshield stutter. And in that split second of darkness, my seat felt heavier, like someone was standing directly behind me, leaning over my shoulder. The reflection showed nothing, but I could smell rain on fabric. The rules were starting to twist themselves into knots, and I was barely holding them together. And somewhere in the shadows of the bus, I had the awful feeling that one of them, maybe more, was already broken. The rain had turned to mist, fine, constant, and clinging by the time we reached the second to last stop. I knew this stretch from the day routes, a short strip with a pawn shop, a laundromat, and a 24-hour diner that smelled like burnt coffee and grease, even from inside the bus. But tonight, all the windows were dark. The diner's neon sign was dead. The pawn shop's bars dripped water like they were sweating. Nobody got off. Nobody got on. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. And behind it, quieter but somehow sharper, the faint tap of water droplets hitting the floor in the back. I glanced at the mirror. The bald man still sat in the last seat, but the shadow wasn't around him anymore. It was inside him. His outline was wrong. Thicker, fuzzier at the edges, like he was being redrawn badly with every flicker of the ceiling light. The woman with the paper bag had turned completely away from him, pressing herself against the window. The trenchcoat man's hands were gripping the seat in front of him so tightly, his knuckles looked white even in the dim. The helmeted passenger sat unmoving, but I realized something I hadn't noticed before. He was now in the row directly behind me. We pulled out of the stop, And that's when I heard it. A voice, low, ragged, right at my ear. "What time is it?" Every muscle in me locked. The voice wasn't coming from a passenger. It was coming from the space just behind my head, the space that should have been empty. Rule 4, if a passenger asks the time, tell them it is exactly midnight. "It's exactly midnight," I said, my voice too tight. There was no response, no sound of footsteps moving away, just that cold, damp smell of rain-soaked fabric lingering right behind me. We turned a corner, and there was stop 4 again, third time. Rule 6, if you pass stop 4 twice, you have missed your exit. Do not attempt a third pass. The man in the red jacket was there again, but this time he was closer. Not on the curb. In the road, directly in the path of the bus. His face was pale and fixed, mouth stretched too wide in a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The bus lights glinted off water running down his cheeks, and his timetable was gone. Now he held an envelope. Rule 7. Should a passenger hand you an envelope, place it unopened in the glove compartment. Never look inside. I didn't stop. I swerved slightly, just enough to miss him, but in the mirror, I saw him standing in the lane, watching us go. Envelope still held out. The helmeted passenger was now leaning slightly forward in his seat. The visor caught the dim light, and for a fraction of a second I saw my own reflection in it. Only my eyes were closed. The road narrowed. The walls on either side of the street drew closer, higher, until it felt like we were driving between two massive black slabs. No signs, no windows. The mist thickened until the headlights showed nothing beyond 30 feet. That was when the bald man finally moved. He stood from the last seat, the shadow peeling off him like smoke, but instead of falling back into the seat, it stuck to the ceiling. It spread across the roof of the bus like ink in water. Rippling, the bald man walked toward the front, each step unnervingly slow, his shoes leaving no sound. As he passed the helmeted passenger, the helmet tilted upward to follow him. He stopped in front of me. His face wasn't right anymore. The skin was too smooth, stretched thin like wax that had started to melt. His eyes were too far apart. His mouth was barely a slit, but it opened enough to speak. "You started with 2, he said, in a voice like wet gravel. "You will finish with more." I realized then the rules weren't to protect the passengers from me. They were to protect me from the passengers. The shadow above the bald man dropped, not down onto him, onto the floor in front of me. It began crawling forward, sliding up the steps toward my seat like liquid climbing uphill. The woman with the paper bag was now sobbing quietly, rocking back and forth. The trenchcoat man's lips moved like he was praying. The helmeted passenger stood. Slowly, I jammed the accelerator, but the road ahead wasn't a road anymore. It was just black. Not darkness, black. A solid wall of it stretching from the ground to the sky. The bus rolled to a stop on its own. The bald man stepped down the stairs into the black. The shadow followed. The helmeted passenger was next. At the bottom step, he turned his visor toward me one last time. In the reflection, my eyes were still closed, but my mouth was smiling. The trenchcoat man stood and followed them into the dark without hesitation. The woman with the paper bag clutched it tighter, then stepped off too. When they were gone, the doors stayed open. The interior of the bus was silent except for the faint sound of water dripping in the last row. I turned. The last seat wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting there, wearing a soaked red jacket. The figure stood and began walking toward me. I pressed myself against the wheel, but they didn't stop until they were inches away. They reached into their pocket and pulled out an envelope. White, perfectly dry, despite the wet jacket. I didn't take it, and they set it gently on the dash. The moment it touched the surface, the words appeared in small black print. "Exit voided." The doors hissed shut. The engine roared back to life. When I looked up, I wasn't in the depot. I wasn't in the city. The bus was moving down an endless road lined with streetlights that flickered in perfect unison, stretching into forever. And in the mirror, every seat was full. There are moments in your life when you realize you've crossed a line. Subtle, silent moments when the air feels heavier, the colors slightly duller, and something behind your eyes starts to ache in a way you can't explain. Mine came on a Tuesday night. I wish I could say it was some grand epiphany, that I saw the error of my ways and turned around. But truth be told, I didn't stop. I didn't even flinch. I hit purchase and waited. Let me back up. My name's Nathan. 29, unemployed or freelancing, depending on how you look at it, and bored out of my skull. I used to edit wedding videos and cheap corporate stuff until the algorithm gods decided I was no longer relevant. So I started a YouTube channel instead, like everyone else. It was supposed to be easy. Find some niche, slap on some ominous music, and boom, instant success. But 3 months in, and I had 6 subscribers. 1 was my mom. 2 were bots and the content, generic horror stories I'd stitched together from Reddit and old 4chan posts. Nothing new, nothing real. I wanted more. The dark web had always fascinated me, not in a buy drugs or hire a hitman way. I'm not that kind of broken, but in the voyeuristic sense. The forbidden fruit, the idea that somewhere, buried beneath layers of encryption and paranoia, there existed a digital underworld untouched by TikTok trends and BuzzFeed lists. That's where I first saw it, the mystery box thread. It was on a forum so buried in Tor layers, you'd think the thing was designed to keep secrets alive. No usernames, no likes, no upvotes, just a flat black background and gray text that bled into your retinas after 5 minutes. Buy a piece of the unknown. Each box is different. Each box is real. No refunds, no tracking, no communication. The thread was 27 pages long. People posted photos of what they got. Old VHS tapes with scrambled audio, cracked porcelain dolls smeared with what looked like dried blood, tattered notebooks written in dead languages, memory cards with files that refused to open. One guy claimed he got a jawbone, human, still wet. I didn't believe half of it, maybe not even a quarter, but I was hooked. It wasn't cheap. They wanted $250 in crypto. Not that much when you think about what people spend on NFTs or fake Twitter verification, but enough to make you hesitate when your rent is overdue. Still, I wired it. The address was simple. A P.O. box registered to a name that Google had no record of. Not even a LinkedIn profile. That's how you know someone's truly invisible. The confirmation came via a line of code on the site itself. No email, no receipt. Just a blinking green text. Box number 0081, order received. Expect delivery within 14 days. And that was it. No contact, no reassurance, no going back. For the first 2 days, I told myself it was for the channel. Imagine the content, I said. Dark web mystery box, real footage, not clickbait. I'd even picked the thumbnail, my face in exaggerated shock, the box glowing like the freaking Ark of the Covenant. But somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't about clicks. I wanted to feel something real, something raw. I wanted a crack in the simulation, a ripple that reminded me I still existed. And that's exactly what I got. The days crawled by like a slow infection. The clock seemed to mock me, ticking louder in the dead quiet of my apartment. 4 days, 5 days, 6. Each morning I woke and immediately checked the mailbox, even though rationally I knew nothing would be there. The courier in the city wasn't exactly dependable, and with something as off the grid as this, there was no tracking number to make the wait any less maddening. My phone buzzed with meaningless notifications, Twitch streamers, failed emails, and a single text from my mom asking if I'd eaten. I didn't respond. What was the point? I tried to keep busy, editing videos, scrolling through social media, forcing myself to laugh at dumb memes. But all the while, my mind returned to the box, to what might be inside, to the stories of those cursed or blessed enough to have their lives touched by whatever came from the deep web's underbelly. On day 7, a knock rattled my door just after dusk. My heart jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. Delivery usually dropped packages without a sound. I hesitated, then cracked the door open just enough to peek out. No one was there. Just a plain, unmarked cardboard box on the welcome mat. I grabbed it without thinking, the weight oddly comforting in my hands. Back inside, I shut the door and stared. No return address, no logo, no writing, just a strip of black tape sealing it shut. I set it on my cluttered desk, the glow of my computer casting long shadows over the room. It felt heavier than I expected, like it wasn't just cardboard, but packed with some unseen density. I didn't want to open it, not yet. Instead, I sat back and stared at it, ran my fingers along the edges, tracing every crease and imperfection. What was I really expecting? Another cheap prop? Something to fake clicks and likes? Maybe, but maybe not. The box seemed to pulse under my fingertips, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The air in the room shifted, just slightly, but enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it wasn't just my imagination. For the next few days, odd things happened. My lights flickered at strange hours. The hum of my laptop stuttered in the middle of videos. Sometimes when I glanced at the box, it looked different. Not physically, but like it had been moved or breathed. Or maybe I was going insane. My dreams became fragmented nightmares, whispered voices I couldn't place, faces blurred just beyond clarity. I started hearing sounds, soft tapping, like fingernails rapping on wood, coming from the box even when it was closed. I told myself it was stress, the stress of being stuck, broke, and alone, but deep down I knew it was something else. The box was alive. I knew this because the night before I finally dared to open it, I found a note slipped under my door. No handwriting, just a single sentence typed on a crumpled piece of paper. Open when the clock strikes 3. I checked my phone. 2:45 a.m. And just like that, I realized I was no longer the one in control. The box was. The seconds dragged like molten tar as I stared at the clock, its faint green digits glowing in the dark. 2:59. The air in my cramped apartment felt thicker, heavier, as if some invisible weight was pressing down on my chest, making every breath a struggle. I wasn't just nervous, I was terrified. Not of the box itself, or at least not yet, but of what opening it might mean. For 7 days I had danced around this moment, letting the dread build inside me like a storm, swelling in the distance. Now, the storm was here, and I was standing on the edge, staring straight into the abyss. The box sat there on the desk like an ancient relic, the black tape gleaming unnaturally in the pale light of my laptop screen. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, a sinister metronome counting down the last few seconds. 3 a.m. The clock beeped, sound shattering the silence. My hands trembled as I reached out, fingertips brushing the rough cardboard. The moment my nails touched the tape, a cold shock shot through me like electricity lancing down my spine. I paused. "Don't chicken out," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The tape peeled away with a sickening crack, breaking the fragile barrier between me and whatever was inside. Inside, I found another box, smaller, jet black, smooth like obsidian. No markings, no writing. I lifted it out, feeling the weight press into my palms like it was trying to sink into my skin, and the room seemed to grow colder, and my breath came out in shallow puffs, misting in the freezing air. Then, before I could think twice, I opened the black box. Inside lay a small glass vial, no bigger than a thimble. Its contents shimmered, a thick, viscous liquid that glowed faintly with an unnatural blue light. A note, folded meticulously, rested beside the vial. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Drink when ready. Truth waits in the darkness. My rational mind screamed to throw it away, to burn the vial, to forget the whole damn thing. But some primal part of me, the part that had been starving for something real, something dangerous, reached out and uncapped the vial. The scent hit me first. Metallic, like rusted iron, mixed with a hint of something sweet and rotten. It was nauseating and intoxicating all at once. I hesitated a heartbeat longer than I should have, then swallowed. The liquid burned like fire, sliding down my throat, igniting a storm inside me that spread with terrifying speed. At first, nothing happened. Then the world shifted. The room seemed to breathe, the shadows stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes. The edges of my vision darkened, the colors bleeding out like wet paint. A low hum filled my ears, rising steadily until it became a deafening roar. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. Not physically moved, but mentally ripped from my reality. I was plunged into a waking nightmare. The walls of my apartment melted away, replaced by a void so black it swallowed everything whole. And in that darkness, I saw them. Faces, thousands of them, eyes staring, unblinking, mouths open in silent screams. Their skin was translucent, their veins pulsing like circuits beneath fragile flesh. They drifted around me like lost souls tethered to some horrific nightmare. One face detached itself from the swarm. A woman, her eyes deep wells of sorrow and rage. She reached out, fingers brushing my cheek with a coldness that seared like ice. Her voice echoed inside my head, a whisper like wind through dead leaves. "You opened the door. There's no going back." I tried to scream, but no sound came. The faces closed in, the void pressing closer, suffocating. Then, just as suddenly as it began, I was back, gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a jackhammer. The vial was still in my hand, empty now, but the residue on my lips tasted like ash and despair. For hours I sat frozen, unable to move, trapped in the aftershock of whatever hell I'd glimpsed. And then came the calls. My phone buzzed violently, texts flooding in from unknown numbers, strings of coded messages, distorted voices playing backwards, images that made my skin crawl. I answered one. A raspy voice whispered, "We're watching. You're ours now." From that moment, nothing was the same. Lights flickered constantly. My apartment grew colder, shadows longer and darker. The box was gone, vanished as if it had never existed, but its presence lingered like a poison in the air. Every night, the whispers returned. They seeped through the walls, crawling under doors, invading my dreams. And the faces, those endless, soulless faces, haunted every corner of my mind. I was trapped between worlds, between sanity and madness, between the known and the unknowable. I'd sought a story, and the story found me. The line between reality and nightmare didn't just blur, it shattered, splintered into shards so jagged they cut into every waking moment, every breath, every heartbeat. I was no longer the hunter of a story, I was its prey. Days bled into nights without distinction. My apartment, once a place of refuge, had become a cage, an echo chamber of shadows and fear. The whispers never stopped. At first, they were faint, soft, like a distant storm rolling in, but soon they twisted into a cacophony of voices, pleading, mocking, screaming, They weren't voices from this world. They came from that void I'd glimpsed when I drank the vial, the place where those faces waited, and now they wanted in. I began to see them everywhere. At the edge of my vision, pale figures, drifting just out of focus. Reflections in mirrors that didn't match reality. My own shadow stretching into impossible shapes, writhing like a living thing. Sleep became a battleground. Each night I was dragged back into that blackness, the swarm of faces waiting, closing in. I could feel their cold breath on my skin, their dead eyes boring into my soul. The woman, the one who had touched my cheek with ice, returned. She whispered secrets no human should know, names, dates, horrors buried in history's darkest corners. She promised truths that shattered my mind like glass. But the cost was my sanity. I tried to fight it, tried to anchor myself in the real world, worked extra hours, met a friend for a drink, forced myself outside. But the darkness followed. It was in the wind's howl, the screech of tires, the flicker of streetlights. The final straw came when my phone went silent. No calls, no messages, no voices. Just a single text, glowing on the screen like a beacon in the void. Come find us. I didn't know who they were. The people behind the box, the void, the whispers. But I knew this was a summons, a trap. And something deep inside me told me I couldn't refuse. I packed a bag, just in case, and stepped outside into the night. The city was unrecognizable. Streets twisted and warped, buildings leaning at impossible angles. The air buzzed with static, heavy and charged. I followed the pull, like a magnet dragging me towards some dark truth. It led me to an old warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place that reeks of rust, dust, and forgotten sins. Inside, the air was thick with decay. In the center of the cavernous room stood a figure, cloaked in shadows. No face, just a void where eyes should be. "Welcome," it said, voice like gravel grinding against glass. Around me, the faces gathered, not just specters now, but flesh and blood. Men and women twisted beyond recognition, their skin stretched tight over bones like masks, eyes hollow, mouths sewn shut. They reached out, hands clawing at my clothes, skin cold and slick. "You sought the story, now live it," the figure whispered. Pain exploded in my chest, a searing fire ripping through flesh and bone. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing I saw before the world faded was the woman's face, eyes burning with cruel amusement. No one opens the door without paying the price. When I woke, I was back in my apartment. Or so I thought. The walls bled shadows. The air tasted metallic. The whispers were louder than ever. But this time, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone, and I was never going to be free. The box was gone, but its curse wasn't. It had marked me, bound me, turned me into a vessel between worlds, a prisoner in my own mind, a ghost trapped in a story that would never end. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling, and typed a message. "If you find this, don't open the box." But even as I hit send, I knew it was too late. The story had found you, and the darkness was already creeping in. I arrived before sunrise because the email said the principal liked punctuality. I parked in the far corner of the lot under a sycamore whose limbs looked like veins against a low, heavy sky, and I sat there with my palms on the steering wheel until the dashboard clock clicked from 6:59 to 7:00. My breath fogged a patch on the windshield and cleared. The school loomed across the cracked asphalt, a low brick box with a cafeteria annex and two wings slanting out like blunt arms. Half the letters were missing from the marquee out front. Welcome, B.C. Subs. I walked in with a tote bag over my shoulder and a thermos of tea, and the first smell that met me was industrial cleaner, sharp, minty cold at the back of my throat, undercut by something warmer and older. Dust, paper, stale chalk. The office was just to the right of the main doors, behind glass that had been etched with a cougar mascot and Maine. A sign promised visitors report here, with a faded arrow pointing down to a scratched bell. The secretary stood when I stepped in, her smile practiced and broad. Her name tag said Diane in all caps, and a small crocheted pumpkin sat by her keyboard, though it wasn't October yet. "Mr." she said, hand halfway extended. The clock behind her said 7:02. I opened my mouth. It was strange, the way the name took a second to lift. "Carver," I said. "Theo Carver. Subbing for Henderson, English?" "Of course," she said, as if I'd confirmed something she was already sure of. "We're so grateful you could come on such short notice." She slid a clip-on badge across the counter, a laminated rectangle with my name printed in blue, and a number in red, 14. "You'll need to wear that where it can be seen. Lights in the East Wing flicker sometimes," she added conversationally. "Don't mind them. Frank's working on it." "Frank?" "Our custodian." She leaned over the counter to peer at me, squinting as if a thought caught her somewhere behind the eyes. "You look very familiar." I laughed. Maybe I have one of those faces. "You do," she said without humor. "You really do." She gave me a manila envelope, thick with handouts and schedules. "Bell schedule's in there, your attendance sheets, a map. Mr. Henderson's lesson plans are, well, he keeps things tidy." Her mouth tugged. "Room 205, second floor, East Wing. Watch the third step up. The tread's loose." A man passed behind her, brisk with a lanyard, heavy with keys. He paused at the door to the hallway and pointed at my sticker and gave me a thumbs up. "You're early this time," he said, and disappeared without looking for my response. Diane didn't seem to hear him. She'd already turned to her computer. "Have a good day, Mr. Carver," she said, and when she thought I'd gone, I heard her mutter, "Again." On the way up, the lights did flicker. The East Wing ceiling panels were yellowed around the edges. Some buzzed, some were dead. Every few steps, the smell shifted. Bleach near the science labs, coffee near what was probably the teacher workroom, something like wet wool near a locked door marked storage. The tread on the third step up did indeed wobble. I paused to see if it was actually loose. It wasn't, it just gave the feeling of empty space beneath. Room 205 was on the right, door propped open by a wedge of extra textbooks. Henderson's name was on the placard outside, but his first name had been rubbed off or never printed. The room was what you'd expect. Square, windows looking out to a courtyard with a brick planter and an iron bench, a smart board with an old projector mounted above it, a whiteboard dark with ghost streaks of old marker. Posters of Shakespeare and Langston Hughes curled at the edges. I put my bag on the desk. On Henderson's chair, an elastic hair tie stuck to the vinyl like a fossil of previous afternoons. I set out the handouts, checked his lesson plan, a short story by Carver, which felt like a coincidence too obvious to mention if anyone noticed, and turned on the computer. The login screen had his name. The clock at the bottom right corner said 7:15. The wall clock said 7:11. The second hand on the wall clock ticked and then stopped for a breath, then ticked again, as if deciding. First bell at 7:30. I copied the attendance list onto a clipboard. My name was printed at the top. Substitute, Theodore Carver. The handwriting on the attendance sheet had been filled in, though, nothing to do with me. Next to each printed student name was a set of pale check marks, like someone had already taken attendance for me with a too light pen. At the bottom, someone had written my full name and the date in a hand I didn't recognize. Careful cursive, loops like old photographs. Theodore Abel Carver. I paused. The middle name was correct, though I never used it. The hallway murmured to life as feet and voices came up from the main hall, crowding and then thinning. My first students trickled in, some glancing at me and away, some stopping at the threshold like they'd expected someone else, all of them carrying that particular morning energy of rural kids who haven't decided if school will be a relief from their lives or the opposite. One girl, Gina, walked straight to the window and stood with her palm flat on the glass like she was expecting it to warm beneath her hand. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Mr. Carver. We'll be working on it." They were polite enough, yes, but off in small ways. A boy in a camo hoodie sat in the front and watched me with an unblinking attention that felt more like diagnosis than curiosity. Another boy with acne made of blessed little constellations opened his notebook and chewed the paper at the corner. A girl with a tiny gold Jesus on a chain avoided my eyes so deliberately it created its own kind of attention. When I passed out the handouts, most of them took them with both hands like objects with heat. Somewhere down the hall, a laugh cut off. The bell rang, though I didn't see anyone touch the panel. The wall clock said 7:25 and then snapped its black hands forward to 7:30 like a magic trick performed against its will. I took roll, checking names and glancing to faces. When I called Gina, the girl at the window didn't turn. The one in the back lifted her chin and said distinctly, "Here, today." The camo boy smirked and lowered his eyes to his desk as if at a private joke. When I said Jackson L., two boys said "here" in overlapping voices, and then both laughed, surprised to discover each other's timing. A boy named Eli looked around when I called him, like he hadn't recalled beforehand he was an Eli. "Are you really Mr. Carver?" someone asked when I paused, not unkindly. Because the last substitute wasn't. "Who was the last substitute?" I asked. Silence. It was not hostile. It was the blank wall of kids who simply don't have information and refuse to fake it. "We're reading Raymond Carver's Cathedral today," I said. "Raise your hand if you've read it before." Some hands, some non-hands that had the shape of hands, not raised. The air conditioner coughed and stirred. Something ticked in the vent above the whiteboard. Bug, and stopped. We read. They were engaged by the story in a way that made me briefly forget the earlier oddness. They liked the narrator's brisk ugliness. They liked the slow, strange opening of the narrator's mind. At the part where the drawing begins, the boy with acne whispered "oh" in a way that made me like him. I asked the kind of questions student teachers ask when they want students to feel clever rather than cornered. It went fine. It went. And when the bell rang for the end of first period, a girl with chipped purple nail polish slipped a folded sheet of paper onto my desk as the flow of bodies became a river in the door. I noticed it because the folded corner had a fray, like a hangnail. I waited until the room was empty to unfold it. "You're not supposed to be here." The letters were blocky, nearly childish, drawn slow, ironed by pressure. "The real you gets here tomorrow." I looked up at the clock. It said 8:18, and then shuddered to 8:20 and settled. The hallway was suddenly and deeply quiet, like someone had shut a door between me and the rest of the building. At the top of the attendance sheet, a smudge I didn't remember touching had spread into a fingerprint, swirled familiar. The note sat on the desk like a weight I could feel in my forearms. Second period arrived with a sudden slam of sound, a rush of bodies, laughter that didn't quite match the mouths that made it. I kept the note face down and slid a notebook on top of it. I told myself that it was a prank, an initiation, a country kid joke. I made my tone light. I held up the hand out again like a shield. "Didn't you already do this last week?" a boy asked it idly, not accusing, as he let himself drop into a desk with a clatter. A couple of others nodded and murmured something that might have been agreement. "We did the drawing thing. Like, we closed our eyes." "You must have had a different sub," I said. And even as I said it, something in the way the fluorescent above me hummed. Steady, then stuttering, then steady, made me feel like I was speaking into a recording and hearing myself a half-second later. "It was you," the boy said, and then seemed to reconsider. "It was like you." The second period attendance list had check marks, too, fainter than the first. At the bottom, in careful cursive, Carver, Theodore Abel, present. My hand drifted to my badge and found that the plastic had warmed against my chest, as if something behind it breathed. The classes continued. Lunchtime arrived with a thud of trays and voices that rose and sank like waves. The staff room lay at the end of the hall, past a bulletin board made of cork that had been stabbed so many times the cork had a rash. The sign on the staff room door said, "Members only. Tea teachers eat." Someone had scratched beneath in pen. Inside, a fridge taped shut with a note that said, "Please stop stealing." A microwave with a yellowed plastic handle. A coffee machine that had seen wars. 2 round tables. 4 chairs, then 3, then 4 again when I wasn't watching. A woman with hair the color of pennies sat at one table with her lunch in containers, neat as an accountant. A man in a zip-up fleece came and stood by the coffee, poured it, took a sip, and grimaced. "Mud," he said. He swirled the mug so that the liquid lapped at the rim and stayed just shy of leaping over. "You're the sub," he told me, and when I nodded, he blinked as if satisfied and said, "Didn't you? Never mind." And then, "Frank'll like you. He likes reliable faces." "Frank," I said. I hadn't met him yet. I wondered, as I said the name, why it felt rehearsed. "The custodian," he said, turning his mug so the chip faced away from him. He stared into the coffee like it could answer something. "You must have met him. He says you're early this time." The woman with the copper hair rose and put her hand on my shoulder as she passed to the sink. It was a brief, warm pressure. "First day is always odd," she said. "Everything is new, but everything somehow thinks it knows you. It's just a building. It's just the paint. You'll be fine." Her voice was kind, honest, in a way that made me want to believe her. "I did your cover last Thursday," she said, as if to soften the strangeness with an explanation. "I'm Janine. Good luck, Mr. Carter." "Carver," I corrected, and it came out automatic without a bite. "Sure," she said. She didn't look back as she left, and she took the smell of apples with her. On the way back to my room, I caught sight of him. Across the courtyard, in the second-floor windows of the opposite wing, a man watching. He had his hands on the sill, the way everyone rests their hands when they are trying not to let them fall. He wore what I wore, jacket dark enough it read as black, light shirt, tie a clean blue. He had my posture, that slightly apologetic lean, like gravity always had a small advantage. He had my face. My first thought was, the glass is showing me. My second thought was, the angle is wrong, this is not a mirror. My third thought looked for the rational scaffolding on which to hang this and found none. Between my heartbeats, I felt the sound of the building. Vents, students, the rumble of an old boiler, drop a half step, like a song played slower. He lifted his hand. He didn't wave. He placed his palm flat on the glass and pressed it the way the girl had, and then I could see the reflection of the courtyard in his eyes. The iron bench in the courtyard had only 2 legs, the other 2 missing, and yet, in the reflection, it had 4. "Mr. Carver," someone called from behind me, and when I turned, a boy I didn't recognize yet, tall, hair that couldn't decide which way to lie, passed in the hall with his friends and then slowed. "You okay?" he asked, already drifting. I looked back to the window in the opposite wing. The figure was gone. The window glass was black in patches where it had failed and milky where it had fogged. The space where he'd been was now a reflection of me, and then of the hallway light behind me, and then of nothing. I taught classes, I graded things that didn't need to be graded. My pen bled a little on my fingers so that when I pushed my hair back, I left a faint blue streak above my temple. I didn't look in the window again until my students were bent over independent work, and the room had gone soft with the sound of paper. When I did, the courtyard was empty. The iron bench was whole, then not, depending on whether I looked at it directly or from the corner of my eye. The planter sat around a tree that had no leaves, even though out back I'd noticed cottonwoods that hadn't yet given up. The ironwork on the railing of the opposite wing had a twist like rope. It was around then that I realized the attendance sheet's paper had a different feel than the handouts. It was heavier, thicker, like a wedding invitation. If I rubbed it against itself, it buzzed like a cicada in my fingers. Between fourth and fifth periods, I peeked into the workroom to make copies of the exit tickets Henderson had suggested. The copier stood with its gray mouth open, the tray empty. When I turned it on, it hummed and blinked, and then began to spit paper with methodical competence. It printed not my handout, but my resume. Every line exactly as I had formatted it in the fall, down to the small typo in references available upon request. I had noticed too late it had my phone number, my old address. The copy count climbed. 1, 2, 3. My name repeated, black, crisp. "Hey," said a counselor type in a cardigan at the door, leaning in, her smile worn out, sweet. "We were expecting someone else." She blinked rapidly. "No offense." "None taken," I said. I fumbled with the buttons. The machine continued to birth me. My name slid in rafts to the output tray. My name slithered out onto the floor when the tray filled. The machine didn't stop until I opened it and pulled out the toner cartridge like a heart. As I knelt to gather the copies, the hallway beyond the workroom filled with whispering that wasn't quite words. It was the shape of words in air. I could tell from the rhythm where the syllables would land. If I tried to understand the content, it slid off. My ears made a little ache at the hinge. When I stepped into the hall, the whisper stopped. The silence shone as bright as a polished instrument. A piece of paper lay at the workroom threshold, perhaps dropped, perhaps placed. It had a rust pucker at one corner, like someone had held it with a paper clip long enough for the metal to bleed. I didn't pick it up. I watched the way the overhead light peaked on the tiny bump, dulled, brightened. In my fifth period class, the boy in the camo hoodie, his name, finally anchored, was Tate, waited until the rest had settled and said, "You're wearing a different tie today." "I wasn't here yesterday," I said. He smiled, and it was not a scornful smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a trick to a coin that I did not. "Sure." We read quietly for a while. Outside, the clouds sank lower and the windows glowed with that particular white that makes the inside of buildings feel deeper and further. The air felt thicker, as if the vents had begun to exhale slowly instead of hold their breath. When I called on a girl named Maria, she spoke in a voice that had a second voice laid over it, exactly like hers, but a half step off. As if we were all coming through a delay. It was the first time I heard my own voice echo. When no one else was speaking, I said, "Good point." And my voice said it a half second later with a little rise that I hadn't used. At the end of the period, I wrote the quote of the day on the board, "Only connect." I capped the marker and looked back and found that the quote had written itself beneath mine. Same letters, slightly smaller. "Only connect, only connect, only connect." They layered until the green brick behind the whiteboard felt as if it had taken the chalk into itself. In the staff room, by the single window that looked out at the parking lot, a stack of old yearbooks slumped on a shelf. On a whim, I took one. The cover was a cougar robed in stylized flames. The year was a few years back. In the staff section, a man with my face looked out from a row of small frames. My hair was a little shorter, the tie darker, the look in the eyes expectant. The name beneath was misprinted in a way that would be easy to ignore if you hadn't been looking for it. Though Door Carver, the next yearbook had the name right. The next had no staff photos at all. The record had left a blank where faces should be, a decision that must have had a reason that no one had thought to write down. The last one had a picture of Henderson smiling with squinched eyes and a cat on his desk. The cat's face was blurred as if it had moved when the shutter closed. "Old things make their own choices," someone said, and I turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, sunburnt at the edges beneath the collar, keys heavy at his hip. He wore a shirt with his name stitched on it, Frank. "Do they?" I said. He smiled and lifted his chin. "Sometimes they like to do what they did. Habit's the strongest muscle. You're Mr. Carver." "Yes." "You're early," he said. "For what?" He looked past me, as if the answer were written in the parking lot on the hoods of cars. "Someone will spill milk in the cafeteria at lunch," he said. "A boy will take a fall on the bleachers after last bell. The lights in your room will dim and then come back bright enough to hurt your eyes, and you'll look at the clock." He said it as if reading a list. We don't always choose our turn. "Can you tell me why the copier printed my resume?" I asked, surprising myself with the way the question came out like a stone I'd been holding in my mouth. He nodded as if that were familiar. "Because it remembers you," he said, and I thought how I had never assigned memory to a machine as an actor. "Because it could. Things get laid down. Sometimes they get replayed." He left without waiting for my thanks, and I stood there with the yearbook open, looking at a small picture of my own face, and behind it feeling something shift in the building, as if a weight on the opposite side of a seesaw had been removed, and the whole structure were rising a little on one end. By seventh period, the light had the color of late afternoon, despite the wall clock insisting on what it insisted. The hallway had emptied and filled in loops that didn't align with the schedule. Sometimes the bell would ring and nothing would happen. Sometimes it wouldn't, and kids would flow anyway. I stood in my doorway and watched two boys circle back past, 3 times in under a minute, the third time with their hair parted on the other side. The loose tread on the stairs seemed to give a little more. The smell of cleaning chemicals intensified, then faded to the ghost of something floral, then returned as a mint we were all chewing invisibly. A teacher I hadn't met, with a vest patterned in ducks, stopped at my door. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Is this—" I began, and I realized how the question would sound. "Is this how it is?" He adjusted his vest, considered. "You get used to the building's moods. It's like old barns or churches. It keeps company with itself." He looked over my shoulder at my students who bent over their desks, like images in an ad. "We all follow the list well enough. The list follows us." "What list?" "The one in the drawer." He nodded at my desk. "Henderson keeps it under the cassettes." "What cassettes?" I said, but he was gone, already halfway to the stairwell. In Henderson's bottom drawer, under a detritus of pens and rubber bands and a half-eaten roll of antacids, a black plastic cassette case lay like a fossil. I lifted it. It had no label. Beneath it, a legal pad on which the top sheet had been torn away. Under the second sheet, faintly impressed by pressure, a list. If I tilted it, the letters glimmered. 8:34. Girl asked to go to nurse, doesn't go. 9:12. Announcement. Glitch. Repeats. We are. 10:27. Copy machine. Resume. 11:02. Courtyard. Self. 12:14. Frank says, "You're early." 1:03. Storage room door. 1:39. Note. Too early. 2:20, arrival. My eye snagged on storage room door. The storage room door at the end of the east wing had been locked that morning, the smell of wet wool feathering beneath it. I had not tried it at 1:03. The bell for the beginning of 7th period murmured, then brayed, and a voice came over the intercom with a sound like breath near the mic. We are, it said, then cut, then pipped back. We are experiencing minor technical difficulties. Please disregard. The voice sounded like Diane's, but a Diane a few degrees warmer or cooler. I looked up at the clock. 1:02. The second hand stuttered and leaned forward like someone pushing open a heavy door. 1 minute and 3 seconds. I told my students to continue reading. I walked down the hallway to the storage room door as if it had been my idea. The door was painted the gray beige of file folders. Someone had stuck a paper snowflake to it whose arms had softened with humidity. The handle was cold when I reached for it. It turned in my hand. Inside, the light came on a second after the switch, as if it too had needed to think. Metal shelves, delightfully practical, spare paper towels, a box of emergency deodorant, cardboard labeled chemistry goggles, a bucket of tennis balls. The smell was stronger, yes, wool and wet carpet and the sharpness of unslept nights. The room had no windows. A single dark spot stained the cement near the back wall, in the corner where things were jammed. Something rustled behind the top shelf and then stilled. On the back of the door, at eye level, someone had scrawled with a black marker, broad point that bled into the paint. You are early, that was all. A cough, a small sound not human, came from where a dozen old TVs crouched like black cows. I took a step forward and immediately wanted to take it back. I didn't. My shoes made their own decisions between the TVs, a plastic bin, the lid askew. A stack of clipboards leaned like a pile of shields. A loose few sheets of paper had slid beneath the bin so that only their corners showed like tongues. I knelt and picked one up. Too early, it said. The letters were blocky, drawn slow, ironed by pressure. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't remember setting it to vibrate. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. A text from unknown, arriving. A second text, parking lot. I looked at the time on the phone, 1:38. I looked up at the room clock above the storage shelf, 1:39. Someone had written 1:39 on the legal pad list in my imagination and in real ink. On my way back to my classroom, the hallway seemed longer. I mean that in the simple way. The distance had stretched. The scene repeated every 20 feet. The water fountain with the loose button, the poster about bullying that said, "Speak up," with cartoon mouths and speech bubbles, the locked door with the small wired glass. I passed the window to the courtyard and paused and measured the courtyard with my eyes like one measures a stage before a performance. The iron bench had become simply a shadow that suggested the idea of a bench. The tree had leaves now, small, bright, like something new in a familiar room. Across the way, in the glass of the opposite wing, I glimpsed movement, the shape of a person turning away as if not to be seen. Their shirt was light, a tie, a hand. "Mr. Carver?" A voice called from far behind me, and when I turned, the hall had no one in it. The fluorescent above me buzzed and then went so quiet I could hear my own breath. When I reached my classroom door, a student stood in it. She had hair that fell in a sheet so black it drank the light. "Can I go to the nurse?" she asked. "If you need to," I said. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the back wall and then back to me. She nodded as if confirming an answer she already knew. She didn't go to the nurse. I watched her walk to the stairwell and through, and on the other side of the window in the stairwell door, she passed again, hair on a different shoulder. The day complicated itself. In the last 2 periods, the walls had a gray light to them that came from nowhere. The students were quieter and therefore louder. A boy stared at me with a concern that made him look like a small adult. "You're doing fine," he said, apropos of nothing. "I know," I said too quickly. "We'll listen," he said. "We remember. Mostly we remember. In the very last period, something like ninth, though their schedule called it something else, they were past polite. The air felt thick in a way that collected in the ear canal so that the room had a little underwater dullness, and every sound above that thickness sounded brittle. The announcements blared and then didn't. Through it all, the intercom stayed a little warm, like someone still held the button down at the main office. "Didn't you already do this last week?" a boy in the back asked again, but it was not mocking. It was an inquiry into physics, a question for a lab. We drew with our eyes closed. "You told us to trust it." "You remember that?" I asked. He nodded. For a second, he looked too old for his chair. "We remember a lot. It's just not in a line." The final bell was supposed to ring at 2:10. At 2:05, at least 3 clocks in my room tried to be true. The wall clock stepped forward and stepped back. The computer clock blinked to 2:04, and then died and then lit again. The little analog on my desk that I didn't remember placing there vibrated like an insect wanting out of glass. I felt the tremor in my knuckles, in my teeth. The intercom clicked and my voice came over it, speaking the words I was thinking. "Please have your students remain seated until the dismissal announcement," I said to the school. And in my room, and the students looked up, surprised to hear it from me and not me. They put their pencils down. We all looked at the door. The door opened. Diane stood there a second, her face white in the square of wired glass. Then she moved aside. A man stood in the doorway. He wore my clothes, but slightly different choices. A tie with stripes, not solid. A shirt with a faint pattern like the ghost of plaid. He had my movement, my uncertain tilt. He had the penning stain above his temple, faint like mine had been. He had my face, tender around the mouth from sleeping wrong on the pillow. He had my name tag, Theodore Carver, 14. The red numbers looked darker. He had my voice when he said, "Good afternoon," but he said it with a rhythm that felt like I remembered from a different day. Time did not fragment with shattering glass. It behaved like heavy fabric. It draped. "Which one of you has my key?" he asked, in a voice that was calm enough to set a table. I looked at his hands. He held a manila envelope like mine. He held it like something he hadn't decided whether to open. "Frank let me in," he said when I didn't move. He said I was late. "I'm Theo Carver," I said. He nodded as if collecting data. "So am I." We looked at each other. Our students looked at us both and then at the clock. The boy in the camo hoodie had his head cocked as if listening for a distant engine. The girl with the gold Jesus held the chain at her throat and twisted it around her finger until her fingertip darkened. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, and her two voices braided. "Do we need both?" The other me stepped in. He moved with care, and the way you move when you don't want to spill something intangible. He kept a certain distance between us, as if we had memorized this radius. The students drew their breaths like people around a bed. We were polite. "It's my first day here," he said. "I got the email yesterday. Henderson is out with shingles. I brought his sub-plans," and he held up the envelope. "I parked by the sycamore because I thought..." Diane said, "My badge number is 14? "It is," I said. "I've taught this lesson before." He set the envelope on the desk. He looked down, as if reading the list beneath the legal pad that I knew sat there. "We draw. We don't look. We close our eyes. You tell them to trust the line." "Students," I said, my voice catching once on a word, "you can pack your things?" They packed. They did it slow enough to listen. We didn't talk while they crammed papers into backpacks like memories into drawers. The boy in the back, who had asked about last week, shouldered his bag and said to the room, not to us, "The bell's going to ring wrong." He didn't sound upset. He sounded relieved to have reached a part of the list that didn't require improvisation. "Can I began, and I realized I had wanted to ask him, myself, something ordinary. A teacher question. How do you get them to respond to the Carver story? Do you show the blind man before? Do you admit you don't like the narrator? I wanted to ask what it was like to teach where you are not sure if your body is the same on every bell. Do you get a headache right here?" he asked instead, and he touched his temple exactly where I had left the blue smudge. I touched it too, as if to prove I existed in the conversation, and my finger came away clean. The ink had come off somewhere between periods. The dismissal bell rang. It rang like a bell hears its own echo and turns to find where it is coming from. It rang a minute early, a minute late. It rang 3 times, then all at once, then not at all, and the students rose and looked to see which they were meant to obey, and chose one by each person's old instinct, moving in streams that slid through each other without collision. In the thrashing, it was just us and the hum of the overhead lights and one coughing child and the computer that had decided now was the time to restart and apply updates. The hallway filled with feet. Somewhere, a boy took a fall on the bleachers. The sound was a wooden drum beat, 10 yards and 30 years away. Laughter broke and knit. The intercom clicked and breathed. "Which one of us is supposed to stay?" he asked. "It says arrival at 2:20. He glanced at the legal pad, and I realized he could see the list even if it wasn't inked for him. "It says, we are." "We are?" I said. I realized the intercom carried my words out into the hall, repeated them a beat later to rooms that had already heard them. "We are, we are, we are." Frank appeared in the doorway, like an answer whose shape is right, even if it isn't satisfying. He leaned on the frame with a weariness that felt like the building leaning back. "Don't make it ugly," he said. "It doesn't have to be ugly." "We're not fighters," the other me said, and something in the way he said it made me think he had said it before in other rooms like this one. "You only got one badge," Frank said. He was as neutral as a level. I looked at my chest. The badge was there. Theirs was too. Both said 14. We did the kind of thing people do when the end of a game comes close. We tried to build rules that would make it less ugly. We compared scars, a small half moon on the wrist from a fence, a thin pale line on the knee from a bicycle at 8. We compared tastes. Tea, no sugar. Coffee only when necessary. Black, a dislike for custard. We compared small, stupid things, the way we fold napkins, whether we take our shoes off when we enter, whether we ever knock on wood. These were identical, or near enough that to argue would have been like arguing about which of 2 raindrops is wetter. "What about your middle name?" he asked. "Abel," I said. He nodded. We each said the name of the first person we kissed. We each said the name of the street we grew up on. Our throats felt raw by the third. We each recited our social. We each spelled our grandmother's last name with the vowel that always trips you if you are lying. The answers aligned with a click that felt like bones. Outside, the air darkened, though a clock said 2:17. "I met a girl today," he said. "She asked to go to the nurse." "She didn't go," I said. We both looked at the door. In the end, we did not choose by debate or logic. We did not argue rights or duels or coin tosses. Frank shifted his weight, and the building shifted with him. The hallway outside our door was emptier, though noises continued. A locker door slammed somewhere, but the slam came soft, like a hand clapping in a glove. The room had the feeling of late afternoon in winter when you can't tell if you're hungry or just tired. He reached into the envelope and pulled out the attendance sheet. He held it so that I could see it. My name was printed at the top, his handwriting across the bottom. He had a neat hand. The careful loops, the old photograph cursive, Theodore Abel Carver, present. Who wrote mine this morning? I asked. He lifted a shoulder. Someone who remembers us. He took a pen from his pocket. He held it point down a moment before writing, as people do when they have already committed but want a second to honor that commitment. If I sign here, he said, touching the page where the teacher signs after last bell, does that? It does whatever it did last time, Frank said. And it's possible I imagined the sadness under the words, the way sad is just a temperature. Do you remember last time? I asked him, but I wasn't sure which him I asked. He signed. The looping signature looked like mine when I take a breath before my name. He set the pen down. Okay, he said, and I heard in his tone the first crack in the polite surface as reality began to insist. Okay. Okay, I said back, as if keeping the infinite possible outcomes in narrow lanes. He reached up and unpinned his badge. He laid it on the desk next to the attendance sheet. I reached up. I unpinned mine. We exchanged them, hands briefly overlapping above the form. His skin was warm, mine was cool, or the opposite. It's hard to say. The room flickered. Not just the lights, but the definition of the objects softened and sharpened, like the building had chosen a different focus setting. Tomorrow, he said, will you? I shook my head once, a small denial to the idea of any promise. We'll see, I said. Simple as a weather report. He stepped back. The air between us felt like a tightrope someone might walk. He did not turn toward the door yet. Felt the urge to say something like a benediction, and had none. The intercom clicked, and the whispery feedback rose and settled. Outside in the courtyard, the iron bench was whole. A person flickered in the opposite wing window, and then not. The tree held both leaves and no leaves, depending on whether you allowed yourself to use the corners of your eyes. The building exhaled. The lights hummed and chose a tone and stuck with it. The clock's second hand committed. He picked up the manila envelope, now lighter by the weight of the attendance sheet. He tucked it under his arm the way I'd tucked mine, as if careful not to crease it. He looked at me. We looked at each other. It is an odd thing to see your own eyes given back to you. Good luck, Mr. Carver, he said. He said it exactly the way Diane had said it that morning. He said it as if it always ends like this. You too, I said. He stepped out into the hallway. He walked away down the corridor, stepping over the loose tread as if it were a puddle. His back was my back. He paused at the stairwell and looked once into the small wired glass, and I could tell by the set of his shoulder he saw himself. He went down. I stood alone. I could hear the building forgetting the day in real time, laughter falling further away, the boiler beginning to think about evening, a song of air in the vents. I turned the smartboard off and watched its square go dark. I turned the whiteboard over with the dry cloth the way Henderson might. The cloth came away gray. The neatly written words beneath mine did not smudge. Only connect. Only connect. Only connect. When I bent to retrieve my thermos from under the desk, another note slid from the crease in the legal pad. It made a sound like a small thing deciding to speak. I picked it up. You're not supposed to be here, it began, in those blocky letters. The real you gets here tomorrow. I held it. The paper felt like the attendance sheets. Heavy, wedding invitation heavy. In the margin, in ink finer than the block, someone had written in that careful cursive, "Stay late if you want to stay." I looked at the clock. 2:20, steady. The intercom clicked and my voice came over it, somewhere out there, saying something I wasn't saying anymore. The voice had the calm of routine. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the cadence. Please have your students. The way of asking people to make choices at the right time. Diane's head appeared at the door. Mr. Carver, she said, are you staying to help with tutoring? He usually does. Henderson, his kids come at 3. I stared at her. Am I supposed to? I asked. She smiled as if delighted by a private joke. If you're still you, she said lightly and lifted a hand to wave and turned away. I pinned the badge at my chest the way one decides a path by placing a foot. It read 14. It read my name. It read anyone's, if you tilted it. On my way down the stairs, the step gave under my foot and then did not, like a memory, picked up and set back. In the lobby, the framed mission statement had fallen slightly crooked. The reflection in the glass showed a man who looked like me, then looked like someone a little older, then looked like a substitute teacher in a different year. The parking lot was a flat gray field under a sky that had chosen the late. When I reached my car, the sycamore above had lost its leaves in the space between moments and then recovered them, small and bright. My phone buzzed, a text from unknown, see you tomorrow. The second text, arriving. I got in and put both hands on the wheel. I watched the minute click from 2:21 to 2:20 and then back, then on. The school sat in the rear view like a place I had been born and forgotten. In the second floor window of the east wing, a man stood with his hand on the glass. He didn't wave. He pressed his palm flat as if the gesture could be a hinge. If there is a loop, someone must be the top of it. If there are two of you, one must be the guest and one the host, unless the house belongs to the house. The note in my pocket said I was not supposed to be here. The badge on my chest made a case for my presence. I turned the key. It didn't catch, not the first time. On the second, the car thought about it, then held. I drove the short length of the lot with the feeling of leaving a party at which I had been the wrong kind of familiar. As I turned onto the road, the marquee letters flickered and then steadied. Welcome back, it said, missing the letters you would expect. Welcome me BCK, which is welcome enough when the building gets tired. At home, I put the note on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. Later, I slept. I woke at 5 a.m., then 5:30 a.m., then 6 a.m. In the shower, I touched my temple and found no ink. In the mirror, I looked like a tried-on version of myself. At 6:59, I sat in the car under the sycamore. The air smelled like mint and something warmer, older. The building looked exactly as it had and slightly older. I waited for the dashboard to click to 7 o'clock and then stepped out, and across the lot, a man stepped out of a car that might have been the same color as mine if you didn't look too close. He walked the same way and hesitated at the door the same beat. He wore a tie with stripes. He held a manila envelope. He looked up at the second-floor windows as if calculating whether he could see himself. "You're early," Frank said at the door, smiling like he knew this was the point where maybe something could change, and also knew it wouldn't. "You beat yourself this time." "Do I sign in?" I asked. Diane already held out the laminated badge. It said 14. She nodded, the same practiced and genuine motion. "Have a good day, Mr. Carver," she said, then softer, "Again." Her eyes did a quick check of my face, like verifying a picture against an ID. They found what they needed and what they didn't. Upstairs, the third step held. The east wing lights hummed. In room 205, something like the smell of chalk pre-existed my entry. On Henderson's desk, the legal pad lay with its top sheet torn off. The attendance sheet had the date. The check marks were faint and nearly there. At the bottom, in that careful hand, my full name weighted present tense. The door to the storage room at the end of the hall wore a snowflake that had softened with humidity. The copier slept with its mouth closed. The courtyard tree had made small choices about leaves that I could not follow. The first bell cried like a memory. Students came, and they were children, and they were older, and they were mirrors, and they were themselves. One girl entered and moved to the window and put her hand to the glass, a ritual I still didn't know. "Can I go to the nurse?" she asked once the bell had trapped us all. "If you need to," I said. She nodded as if this were our secret. We began. We read, we drew, eyes closed. I told them to trust the line. They did. their hands moving in air like blind swimmers. They laughed once, small, when someone's line that had been a house became a bird. The boy in the camo hoodie watched me with that not unkind, not simply curious diagnostic gaze. The girl with the gold Jesus would not meet my eyes, and in the not meeting told me everything I needed to know about how she met them when I wasn't looking. Between bells, when the hallway breathed out an empty space, I stood at the window and looked across the courtyard into the opposite wing, where a man stood watching with his hand on the glass. He didn't wave, he watched. The light lay on his face like a sheet. The iron bench had 2 legs, then 4, then shadow. I had an idea. It was the only one in the room, small as a coin, and it was this. If I wrote the note differently, would it matter? If I wrote no note, which of us would arrive? The legal pad took ink beautifully. I leaned over it and wrote without looking at my hand. You belonged here yesterday. Come when you come. I folded it, carefully making a small triangle at the corner to fray. I did not know which desk would receive it. I could only leave it in the drawer where notes are born. By the final period, the building's breath had slowed until I could feel each inhalation like a wave, lifting the whole structure and settling it. The intercom hummed. My voice whispered a thing I had not yet said, then said it. The drawer of Henderson's desk clicked open on its own, a misaligned thing finding its true slide. The hallway had emptied and filled twice, without the bell admitting it had happened. The light was a color it had not been before and would be again. At 2:17 there was a knock that sounded like a polite hand on a familiar door. The knob turned, the door opened. "Good afternoon," said a voice like mine, with a rhythm I recognized. "I'm Mr. Carver." We were both wearing solid ties today. His mouth had a tenderness at the edges that mine had lost. He held a manila envelope. He had already met Frank today. He had parked under the sycamore. We stood like bookends. The student sat between us like a shelf of things a person tries to balance. "Didn't you already do this last week?" the boy in the back said, but he smiled toward us both, as if giving a line in a play he liked. This time, when we exchanged badges, my hands weren't quite steady. He told me the street he grew up on, and I said it with him. We said the names. We made a small talk of sameness. My throat ached with repetition. He signed the attendance sheet with a flourish I recognized as the way I used to sign when I thought signatures mattered. He took the badge that might have been mine already. When he left, he paused at the looking window in the stairwell. The wired glass reflected a man. The glass had lines that made the man seem briefly stitched. Frank leaned into the door. "It's not always like this," he said. "It's usually like this." "Which one of us stays?" I asked, and it was not a plea, but the question you ask at a crossroad when both paths are maps. "Which one of you can stand to leave?" he said, and the mildness was an old friend. I considered. The badge sat heavy on my chest. The legal pad's indentations read like scripture if you looked at them with your head tilted. The attendance sheet lay with my name written in careful cursive. The students began to rise because the room told them it was time. I could stay. I could stay and do tutoring at 3. I could learn the locker combinations that no one says aloud and how to open the cafeteria milk cartons without tearing the wrong corner. I could learn which students prefer to sit near the vent and which use the window to measure themselves against the day. I could decide that the building's moods were simply weather and that you bring an umbrella and go anyway. I could leave. I could leave and return tomorrow to see which me arrived then, whether the note had changed anything, whether the bench had 4 legs or not, whether Diane said again. I watched the man in the opposite wing lift his hand to the glass. I lifted mine. I felt the cool of the pain. It did not matter if I touched it or did not. The gesture was its own hinge. The bell rang. It rang wrong and right. The building sighed. On the attendance sheet, next to the line for a substitute signature, 2 names had been written, one clean and looped, one a little hurried, a little splayed. both of them mine. I turned the paper over as if that would change which side the signatures could be found on. On the back, in faint, blocky print, impressed by pressure but not inked, the words pressed through. You're not supposed to be here. The real you gets here tomorrow. That night at home, I put the badge on the kitchen table next to the note. The badge's plastic reflected the ceiling light, then my hand, then a man with the same hand who had moved to turn off the lamp in his house where he lived, which might have been mine. I lay down. The room took my shape and then gave it back. I slept. I woke with the feeling you have when a dream has presented you with a choice and you have made it without moving. In the morning, the sycamore would be there. The marquee would be missing letters and still say enough. Diane would karate chop a stack of passes and say my name with the confidence of someone who has said it many times. The list would lay in the drawer. The storage room would open or not. The copier would remember me until it forgot, and then remember again. In the hallway somewhere, my voice would be saying, "We are." It would be saying it in polite tones, calm, practiced, useful. And the second voice would follow it by a beat, and together they would be as true as anything is true in a building that keeps company with itself. If you ask me which of us survived, which one of us continued, which one of us kept the badge, and which one kept the manila envelope, I'll tell you I signed. I'll tell you I left or stayed. Both answers feel right when I say them and wrong when I hold them too long. And when I walk by the window in the east wing, there is a man there with his hand on the glass, and sometimes he is me, and sometimes he is the man who is me, and sometimes he is neither. He never waves. He watches, which is a kind of staying. His breath fogs the glass a little, then clears. The glass keeps his print for a second longer and then lets it go. The first time I heard the rule, it sounded like one of those small town quirks they sell you with the property taxes and the apple festivals. You move in, you never open the locked door, the realtor said, cheerful like it was a local joke. Every house has one. Ask around. I smiled at Mara, who was still in that head-tilted trance of someone imagining furniture in empty rooms. And if we need a closet? The realtor smiled, didn't move. You won't. We signed anyway. The house on Birch Lane was at the edge of the town where the map hiccuped into woods and the pavement forgot its lines. It was a narrow two-story with a porch that leaned just enough to look thoughtful. The paint had peeled into delicate feathery curls like it was molting. The backyard ended in a wooden fence, and beyond that, a wall of pine and black spruce that made its own weather. A small-town rule was not going to scare us off. Double glazing, new roof, and the kind of clawfoot tub Mara had already named. We were not the kind of couple that could afford to be picky. We were the kind of couple that counted loose change at a gas station and high-fived when the register didn't beep. The locksmith came the day after closing. He changed the exterior locks, then saw the interior door halfway up the stairs and stopped like a dog catching a smell. "Is that yours?" he asked, then corrected himself. "Well, it's the house's." It was nothing fancy, that door. Painted the same chalky white as the trim, flush with the wall. No molding to call it special. Old brass knob. A deadbolt installed later. Shinier than the rest. "Realtor said not to open it," I told him, half a joke. The locksmith nodded once like I'd recited a creed. "Good," he said. "I can put a new deadbolt if you want. Something with a key, not just a thumb turn." "We don't have the key," Mara said. "You don't want it," he said, already back to his kit. We laughed about it after he left. We laughed about it again when the welcome basket arrived from the Birch Lane Association. Homemade jam, a coil of dried herbs, and a photocopied sheet titled, in friendly serif, "Housekeeping for Old Homes." Halfway down the list, between "Don't strip old wallpaper in one go" and keep gutters clear, there it was. Leave the interior locked door undisturbed. Do not attempt to open, move, repaint, or adjust. If the knob turns on its own, step aside and do not intrude. If you see light under the threshold after midnight, turn off all lights and wait quietly. Welcome to the neighborhood. Mara stuck the sheet on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a chicken. We are absolutely living in a town that collects folk rules in Microsoft Word, she said. My grandmother would love this. Your grandmother thinks the microwave listens, I said. She's not wrong. She pointed at the stairs. We could hang a mirror on it, the door. Make it less doory. Or a bookshelf that's fake books, I said. Or, hear me out, a tasteful mural. Of what? A door, she said, grinning. We didn't hang anything, not because we believed, but because the door was positioned exactly where your eye landed when you climbed the stairs. You couldn't ignore it the way you can't ignore a missing tooth. It would have made the mirror feel like denial. The first week was a parade of cardboard. We slept on a mattress on the floor because we hadn't convinced 6 of our friends to carry the real one up the narrow staircase. And every morning I woke with a fine constellation of dust on my skin, as if the house shed while we slept. We met neighbors in passing, a mail carrier who wore earbuds and never removed them, an elderly man with a cane like a shepherd's crook, who paused at our fence and said, "New paint's a shame." The house liked the old, and then walked on before I could ask what the house liked about anything. A girl on a scooter who waved with 2 fingers and said, "Don't look through the keyhole," as if commenting on the weather. The keyhole, to be fair, was tempting. The brass was dull and nicked, and the little mouth of it had been daubed with paint once, long ago. The cleaner had scraped the paint out and polished it. When you put your eye close, all you could see was black. On the 4th night, around 12:20, someone knocked on the interior door from the other side. 3 gentle knocks, knuckle on wood. Not a pound, not a rattling slam, just a courtesy. The way you knock when you're sure they're home and don't want to startle. Mara was asleep. I lay on my back, listening to the old house breathe. Radiator ticks like tiny knuckles, a pipe's thin throat clearing somewhere in the walls, and then the knocks came again. 3. Same spacing, same patient rhythm. I was out of bed before I had decided to get up. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped. The house had the kind of nighttime that eats your sense of distance. It felt like I'd been walking for a long time, and the door had stayed exactly as far away as when I had started. I put my palm against the wall, felt the grain under the paint, the cool dampness of old plaster. "Hello," I said, which is how you greet a rule in the middle of the night. Silence. Then, not a knock. Something like a fingertip grazing the painted wood in a soft line, a sound like a nail across a table. I told myself I was being romantic about dust. I went back down. I didn't mention it until breakfast when we were both eating yogurt and Mara said, "I dreamed someone was pacing in the hallway, light footsteps, like they were careful." "I think someone knocked," I said. She glanced up the stairs and then back to her spoon. "Neat." On Saturday, we tried the town's coffee shop. The chalkboard menu was hand-lettered with careful loops. The barista had a tattoo of a door on her forearm, framed in roses and thorns. When she handed us our drinks, she said, "You're on Birch Lane." "We are," I said. "White house, leaning porch, good bones. Your door is halfway up the stairs," she said. "Don't sand it. They had a guy sand one once and the whole street had a week of headaches." "They?" Mara asked. "Before us," the barista said, as if explaining seasons. "Doors are old. Houses remember, even if people don't. My aunt says they started after the flood. Other folks say there were always doors, but we only got smart enough to keep them shut." "What's behind them?" I asked. "Don't know," she said. don't want to. We keep ours shut and we sleep fine. The bell over the door rang. A man in a neon safety vest stepped in and nodded at us like he recognized our faces from the concept of newness. "Birch Lane?" he said. "Don't open it." "We weren't going to," Mara said. He held up his coffee like a toast. "Good." The thing about a rule like that is, once you accept it, your brain starts laying tiny threads of logic to make the rule feel correct. The door is a part of the house. The house is old, and old things have quirks. The town's weird comfort with it is in itself comforting. Maybe the city has its sirens and alleyways where the wind does not sound innocent. Maybe the country has its wells and barns that animals avoid. Here in Birch Lane, your house has a door you don't open. We slept better for a couple nights. We put books on shelves and made a dent in the boxes. And each time I went up the stairs, I felt the door like a cool breath on my right. The knob was never warm. The paint didn't chip. It did not rattle at midnight again. The first thing that really felt wrong was the light. On the seventh night, a stripe of light appeared under the door. It wasn't bright, not electric. It was the kind of light you get on a cloudy day at noon, cold and uniform like the sky pressed flat. It didn't spill. It existed in a solid band that cut the dark of the hall in half. When I put my hand out toward it, my skin looked a shade too pale inside it, the veins green like strands of seaweed. I called down the stairs. "Mara?" She came up in the oversized t-shirt she liked to wear to bed, eyes squinting against the dark. "Is that—" she started, and then she stopped. We stood there together, looking at the light, and it did not flicker, and it did not move. It was simply there. The rule sheet on the fridge had an instruction for this. If you see light under the threshold after midnight, turn off all lights and wait quietly. We'd already turned off our lights. We waited, the two of us sitting on the top step like children, listening for Santa, except that neither of us smiled, and my palms left little moist half-moons on the wood. After 20 minutes, the stripe of light went away, not like a dimmer, but like someone slid a piece of cardboard into place. One smooth motion. We exhaled at the same time. Mara nudged my shoulder with hers. "People can live with anything," she said. "We'll live with this." 2 days later, we found the handwriting. It was behind the wardrobe in the guest room, which was the nice way of saying the room we used to pile things we didn't have space for. We'd inherited a massive oak wardrobe from a friend of a friend who said it had moved himself in here when the previous owners died, which we laughed at until we realized 3 of our friends could not budge the thing. We weren't trying to move it. We were trying to plug in a lamp, and I dropped the plug, and it fell into the half-inch gap, and I swore and got down with the phone flashlight, and that's when the beam caught pencil. On plaster, 6 lines, written in a neat, almost schoolbook hand. Do not talk to them if they use your names. If you see yourself, do not look at your hands. If the floor sounds hollow, leave the house. If the door is already open, close your eyes and count to 60. Do not leave the house between the second and third knocks. If you are asked to help, do not agree. Is this part of the neighborhood word doc? I asked, trying to make it sound light. Mara took the phone and held the light herself. Who writes rules behind furniture? The type of person who buys wardrobes they can't move, I said. She didn't laugh. Alex, she said, we should take this seriously. If it's a prank, it's a mean one. If it's not a prank, it's for us. We copied the lines into our notes. We didn't show them to anyone. There is only so much you can admit you believe before you start to sound like you've joined a club that meets in the basement and wears matching capes. On the 10th night, the temperature dropped. It was an ordinary late summer day, muggy and shy of rain. At midnight, the house exhaled, and suddenly the air in the hall was cold enough to see our breath. The door was cold when I put my palm near it, not on it. The air around it felt like a window, with winter pressed against the other side. The stripe of light returned under the threshold. It was brighter now, the color of schoolroom bulbs. Beneath it, along the floor, thin scuffs became visible. Marks we hadn't noticed before, the kind you see when something heavy drags the same small distance over and over. They led from the door to the top of the stairs, a ghost of motion worn into wood. Mara squeezed my arm. "Is someone living in our wall?" she whispered, a joke that, in the air, did not sound like one. Someone knocked 3 times, courteous, patient. We didn't move. We counted under our breath without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. The light brightened. The stripe widened an inch, as if the door swelled outward. I thought I smelled something, stale paper, old toothpaste, the memory of rain and an umbrella. Then a sound I had not known to fear, the tiny damp click of a tongue against teeth, right next to the keyhole. I bent slow, and the round cameo of brass filled my vision. The keyhole was a dark oval, unhelpful. My eye found itself drifting closer. The rule behind the wardrobe flashed up my spine. If you see yourself, do not look at your hands. Mara's hand on the back of my neck was the only thing that stopped me. "Don't," she said, voice too soft. I straightened. We went back to bed. We did not sleep for a while. I lay watching the doorway to our room, half expecting to see it fill with a stripe of foreign daylight. It was the 12th night when something on the other side tried the knob. It turned slow. Old metal on old metal, reluctant but willing. A quarter turn, a half. Stopped by the deadbolt, the new one, the one with its comforting clean click. The knob turned back, then forward again, impatient. The deadbolt held. Mara sat up. "I'm calling Clark," she said, meaning the supervisor of nothing related to doors, the person we could offer money for a new explanation. He answered with sleep in his voice. When Mara explained, his voice woke without warming. "Don't open it," he said. "Don't block it. Don't talk through it. Don't make an appointment with it like it's a person you can reason with." "What do we do?" Mara asked, and her voice broke on the final word. "You live with it," he said. He breathed. "You're not the first. Put towels against the bottom if the light bothers you. Don't go upstairs between the knocks. If it opens, close your eyes and count to 60. "Close our eyes?" I said, too loudly. "What is this, a kid's game?" He was quiet for a beat. "If you look, sometimes you don't stop looking," he said softly. "It's easier not to put yourself in that position." "Has anyone opened it?" Mara asked. There was a long, small sound then, like a throat deciding whether to be honest. "Don't open it," he repeated and hung up. On the 13th night, the town had its harvest parade. We went because pretending normal is a skill, and we are both very skilled. Children in paper crowns, booths with jars of layered beans. A woman selling honey in jars, shaped like bears. When I paid, she didn't let go of the jar for a second. She looked at me like I had glitter on my face, and she wasn't sure whether to tell me. "Do you hear it yet?" she asked. "Hear what?" I said, already knowing. "The difference," she said, "between your house and the one on the other side." "What other side?" I asked. She smiled like you smile at a child who says the ocean is a really big river. "Go home before midnight," she said. We didn't. We stayed and watched the last float and drank bad lemonade and pretended we lived in a place where the worst thing that could happen was a bee in your drink. At 12:07 a.m., we were on the stairs when the stripe of light returned, and the air dropped, and the knob turned, and the deadbolt gave a little metal sigh, and then, for the first time, the door opened half an inch. Not much, an eyelash, enough to draw a thin, pale line across the wall opposite, a sliver of daylight the wrong color, as if it had been poured through skim milk, enough for the smell to arrive in a clean, blunt wave. Our house, our soap, our coffee, our laundry detergent, but flat, as if passed through another room and mirrored back. The gap was too narrow to see anything through. Only light and smell and that sense of pressure you get when an elevator starts and your stomach argues. We stood on either side of the hall like actors waiting for their cues, and neither of us moved. From the other side, faint as breath on glass, a voice said my name. Not like a question, like a statement made to the room in general. Alex. Mara's hand found my arm. I felt the blood drain from my face, a careful tide retreating. Don't, she whispered, but I hadn't said anything. Alex, the voice said again, a little closer. And it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was mine. Somewhere behind the wardrobe, pencil letters I had copied into my phone arranged themselves into a spine. Do not talk to them if they use your names. The gap did not widen. The light did not change. The smell of our laundry folded itself around us like a damp towel. Alex, my voice said from the other side, patient then soft as tissue. I need your help. Mara's grip tightened until it hurt. The deadbolt creaked just a hair, like a tired jaw. The rule didn't say what to do if they asked twice. It only said, if you are asked to help, do not agree. I didn't agree. I didn't answer at all. The door closed the half inch it had given us, with care, as if mindful of our fingers. The light under the threshold narrowed and vanished. The air warmed by degrees. Somewhere deep in the house, a pipe remembered it had water. Mara exhaled. I realized I had not taken a breath in a while. We went downstairs together and sat at the kitchen table and didn't turn on the light. The fridge hummed. The clock over the stove clicked 1 minute forward. We can live with anything, I said. Mara stared past me into the dark. What if it wants to live with us? She said. We slept in the living room on the couch that night. At 3:20, the house settled like a ship correcting itself, and from upstairs, 3 gentle knocks answered each other. 1, 2, 3, and then silence, a good long stretch of it. In the morning, on the absence of dust on the stairs, there were 2 footprints, side by side, turned toward the door. They were our size. They were not ours. The rule behind the wardrobe added weight, as if someone had traced it in ink. If you see yourself, do not look at your hands. I didn't know why the hands mattered. I didn't know why the floor might sound hollow. I didn't know what it meant to void an exit, or if this town had exits at all. I knew only that the door had opened a sliver and not taken anything but air, and that this was a courtesy we might not be offered again. That night, when the house dimmed around the edges and the stairwell gathered shadow-like skirts, I sat on the top step and waited. Not because I wanted it to open, because it would eventually, and I thought it might be better if we met it sitting down. When the knock came, patient, polite, Mara's hand found mine in the dark. We counted without whispering. We did not speak our names. We did not say yes. The knob turned, the deadbolt sighed. The strip of light slid across the hall like a blade. Somewhere beyond, something that wore my voice practiced asking for help. We didn't talk about it the next morning. Not over coffee. Not while brushing teeth. Not even while Mara stood halfway up the stairs, staring at the locked door as if she could read through it. It was easier to pretend that nothing had happened, that it had been a trick of the dark, a dream we'd both had at the same time. But then I found the paper. It was folded once, neat, and left on the welcome mat like junk mail. No envelope, no signature, just one sentence typed in a bland font, centered on the page. If the door speaks, it's already listening. No greeting, no threat, no explanation. Mara read it twice, then tucked it into the junk drawer under a mess of batteries and rubber bands. Maybe we should call Clark again, she said. And say what? I asked. That the door left us a note? She shut the drawer. We didn't leave it unlocked, she said, but her voice was too thin for it to be a question. By the second week, the house had developed a new habit. It began with the floorboards. Old wood creaks, we knew that. But this was different. This was a pattern, a slow, deliberate pacing from behind the locked door. The steps were even, unhurried, as if whoever or whatever was inside had nowhere else to be. At first it happened only at night. Then it started during the day, while Mara was working at the kitchen table and I was upstairs unpacking books. I'd hear it through the wall. 1, 2, 3 steps. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Always stopping just short of the door itself, as though the walker was careful not to make its presence too obvious. When I put my hand against the wall during one of these walks, the vibration felt faint but undeniable, like someone dragging a finger along the other side of the plaster. One afternoon, Mara came back from town with groceries and a story. "I saw the barista again," she said, unloading apples and a loaf of bread. "I told her we heard noises. She didn't look surprised." "What did she say?" "She asked if we've looked under the door yet." I stopped what I was doing. "Why would we?" Mara shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that wasn't about not caring. It was about not wanting to answer. She said the space under it is bigger than it looks, like there's more gap than there should be. I didn't check, not right away. That night I dreamed I was in the hallway, standing in front of the locked door, except the door wasn't there, just a frame, and beyond it, a room exactly like ours. Same wallpaper, same banister, same creak in the third step. The only difference was the air. It felt heavy, the way basements do, with a stillness that pressed in around my ears. I could hear movement in the copy room. Someone was in there, moving slowly toward me. And then stepping into view was me. Not a perfect match. The hair was wrong, the posture, the way his eyes didn't blink often enough. He stopped just on the other side of the frame, head tilting in small increments, studying me. His lips moved. I didn't hear sound, but I understood the words. "Let me in." I woke up with my nails digging into my palms. 2 nights later, the light returned under the door. We did what the rules said, turned off all lights, stayed quiet. But this time, the light moved. It shifted like someone was pacing with a lantern just inside, the glow swaying slightly with each step. Shadows of something, too tall to be a person, passed across the bottom gap. I didn't breathe, and then the voice again. My voice. But it wasn't saying my name this time. It was describing things, small things. "The apple on the counter is bruised on the left side. There are 3 dishes in the sink. The front door is locked. The back door is not." I felt the hair on my arms rise. I'd checked the back door myself before bed. It had been locked. Mara leaned into me, whispering, "It's lying." I wanted to believe that. The next morning, I checked the back door. The lock was turned open. Around this time, we started hearing from the neighbors. Not directly, not at our door. But in passing, in the store, on the sidewalk, people we barely knew would find ways to slip it into conversation. "You'll get used to it," said the mail carrier without slowing his walk. "Don't look under it," muttered the old man with the cane, as if continuing a conversation from weeks ago. Even the girl on the scooter had upgraded her warning. "If you see yourself, don't wave back." It wasn't advice, it was acceptance. They'd all decided that we'd already crossed into whatever version of Birch Lane they lived in. That Friday night, I gave in. I lay on the top step, flashlight in hand, and angled the beam at the space beneath the locked door. There was more gap than there should have been. At least an inch, too wide for a door in a well-fitted frame. For a moment, I saw nothing but darkness. Then the darkness moved. Something pale darted out of sight, quick as a hand retreating from a hot stove. I dropped the flashlight. When I looked again, there was only the thin, patient strip of light. and the faint outline of 2 bare feet standing just beyond the gap. Toes pointed toward me. When I blinked, they were gone. The pacing started again, slow, careful, like they didn't want me to forget they were still there. The 3rd week felt different, not because the knocking stopped, it hadn't, but because the house started acting like it knew we were paying attention. The pacing behind the door was louder now, no longer shy. The steps sometimes stopped directly at the threshold, as though something inside was leaning against it, listening. At odd times during the day, we'd find things moved just slightly out of place. A mug set an inch from where we'd left it. A sweater folded differently. We blamed each other at first. Then we blamed forgetting. But there was a weight to the changes. They felt placed. The worst was the mirror. It was an old one, oval with a tarnished silver frame, hung at the end of the upstairs hall opposite the locked door. We'd put it there without thinking. One night, as I came out of the bathroom, I noticed my reflection standing still even after I'd taken a step, just for half a second. Enough to catch the delay. I didn't look in that mirror again for days, and on the 21st night, the rules changed. We'd been in the living room when we heard it, the first knock. Mara looked at me. The paper said, "Don't be upstairs between the 2nd and 3rd knocks." We stayed put. The 2nd knock came 5 minutes later, but then the 3rd knock never came. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. The air in the living room felt heavy, the way it did upstairs when the light was under the door. Mara broke first. What if it's waiting for us to check? That's the point, I said, but my voice didn't sound convinced. By 12:40, I couldn't stand it. I crept to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The light was there, not the thin stripe, but a full pale glow spilling into the hall like someone had turned on a ceiling lamp just beyond the door. I took a step up, then another. The glow didn't change. Halfway, I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping, not at the door, from inside the walls like fingernails trailing along wood, tracing the path of the stairs. I froze, and then from upstairs my voice, "It's fine now, come see." It was too casual, too sure. Mara appeared at the bottom of the stairs, pale in the glow. "That's not you," she whispered. The footsteps behind the door began again, slow at first, then faster, circling. The light brightened until it was painful to look at, and then, without a knock, the door opened. Not a crack this time, wide enough to see inside. It was our hallway, perfect. The same banister, the same rug, the same mirror, except the mirror was black, a slick oval of nothing. And standing in the middle of that hallway were 2 figures, United States. They were smiling. Too much. Their teeth were wrong, the way stage props are wrong when you look too close. Their clothes matched ours exactly, except for small, impossible changes. A button that had been lost for weeks, a stain from years ago that had been washed away. They raised their hands in the same motion, palms out, like a mirror greeting. I remembered the rule. If you see yourself, do not look at your hands. But my eyes flicked down anyway. Their hands weren't hands. The fingers were too long, the nails too thin, the knuckles bending in the wrong places like folded wire, and they were moving, slow, flexing motions as though trying to remember how to be fingers at all. "Let us in," my copy said. His voice had all my tones, all my pauses. "We can make it better." Mara's double nodded, smiling wider. "No more rules, just the one you choose." The air between us felt solid. It smelled like our house, but cleaner, newer, as though it had been scrubbed of us and left hollow. The rules behind the wardrobe rearranged themselves in my head. I heard them in the voice of the man with the cane, in the barista, in Clark, in the little girl on the scooter. They weren't warnings. They were survival habits, the kind you pass down when there's no fixing the problem. I stepped back. Mara grabbed my arm and pulled with more force than I thought she had. The doubles didn't follow. They just watched as the door closed on its own, slow and polite. The latch clicked, the light vanished. We didn't go upstairs the rest of the night. In the morning, there was a folded sheet of paper on the bottom step. The same bland font as before. If the door opens wide, it will not close again. We started sleeping downstairs after that. We keep the upstairs dark at night. Curtains drawn, the hallway light bulb removed. The door still knocks. Sometimes we still hear pacing, but it hasn't opened wide again. Not yet. Sometimes, though, I dream of the copy hallway, of standing in the doorway while they wait. And in those dreams, Mara isn't beside me. She's already inside, and she's smiling. Thanks for listening. I really enjoyed putting this story together for you. If you liked it, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and share it with someone who's into this kind of stuff. See you next time.